Contrary to the expectation that an MPB, which is mountain pine beetle, outbreak increases fire risk, spatial overlay analysis shows no effect of outbreaks on subsequent area burn during years of extreme burning across the West. These results refute the assumption that increased bark beetle activity has increased area burned. Welcome, Wild Ones. This is Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. I am doing a solo episode as I do every other week, and this time I want to talk to you about Beetlemania. Yep, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. No, that's not the kind we're talking about today. We're talking about the native mountain pine beetle, an essential component of Western forest ecosystems. But I'm going to talk to you about the government hysterical reaction that's happening yet again across the West, particularly in Colorado, where I am right now, and I'm going to ask for your help. So here's what's going on in a nutshell. There is the latest wave of this native mountain pine beetle. It is a species that lives here and eats trees and kills some of them to create structure in the forest and wildlife habitat. It's a part of nature. We need it here. People see dead trees and they don't like it, but nature likes it and needs it. So we have the latest natural wave. These beetles come every decade or so in these waves. They're always here. These aren't invasive species, this particular species, and they do their thing. So what happened when I had first moved to Colorado in the early 2010s was the previous natural wave of pine beetle had just peaked. And prior to that, there was all of this fanfare and rigmarole about how, oh my God, all of the trees are going to die. There are articles saying nearly all of the large diameter lodgepole pine would die. That's what I believe the U.S. Forest Service or one of the land management agencies were saying. You could see all of these articles about we're going to have no more forests and the wildfires are going to be unprecedented. And frankly, just we need to go into a capsule into the moon because there's not going to be any life left on Earth. That's a bit hyperbolic, but that was the tone of the hysteria. Well, guess what happened? Well, the wave peaked as it always did, and then studies happened. So we're talking about Colorado State University, CU Boulder, and folks from across the West, the United States, and the world came to Colorado to study this particular wave of beetles. And guess what they found over the intervening years? So it's been about 15 years since then. Well, the predictions of all of the forest dying were, of course, false. There were trees that were killed, as always occurs with this. And the direct linkage, the statements of definitive, this is going to happen, all of these fires, guess what? The studies not only did not show an increase in fire ignition or fire severity, it showed a decrease in many cases. Now, I know that sounds crazy. That's why I don't want you to believe me. That's why I'm going to read from peer-reviewed studies, and this is consensus stuff here. There are a lot of areas in science, most areas where there's a lot of debate. There's really not any debate on this. So let me read some of these studies here. Here's a 2015 study by 4 of the world's leading experts from CU Boulder. Contrary to the expectation that an MPB, which is mountain pine beetle, outbreak increases fire risk, spatial overlay analysis shows no effect of outbreaks on subsequent area burn during years of extreme burning across the West. These results refute the assumption that increased bark beetle activity has increased area burned. Wow, okay, that's one study. Well, let's look at another one. A 2025 study. So this has happened after more fires. This is co-authored by Brian Bouma from Boulder, who was funded by the city and county of Boulder and Jefferson County to look into fuel reduction, logging. That's a whole other can of worms, although it's directly connected. But anyway, this person has background of being employed by local governments to study this stuff. His study, in general, research suggests that large patches of beetle-killed trees are generally less flammable at broad scales, not more so. What? Yeah, let me read that again. Large patches of beetle-killed trees are generally less flammable at broad scales, not more so. What do you mean? A dead tree is more likely to burn than a live tree. Well, actually, not true. I understand why you believe that, mostly because people have told you lies about that. But yeah, we think about firewood in a fire. But think about it this way. If you look at a living tree, you have all of those needles there and then all of the resin in there. It's actually easier for that to catch fire than just kind of like a standing dead log. You go ahead and throw a dead log directly into a lighter or a match flame, just puts it out. But if you put the little stuff, the kindling, that's more likely. So it's not the trees themselves. Oh, well, let's see about more studies. Okay, maybe those were done by hippies, right? Okay, well, let's see the U.S. Forest Service, which is the single greatest threat to public lands through their timber sale program. Well, their own 2018 study says a spatial analysis of 466 fires, all but one less than an acre from 1980 to 2005, did not find a relationship between MPB, mountain pine beetle, caused mortality in subsequent fires. Then they name a couple scientists here, examined burned and unburned lodgepole pine stands and indicated that beetle-caused mortality did not increase fire probability. Observed fires were driven by climatic factors that foster dry conditions, which is consistent with previous studies. What do you know? The exact thing that we've been saying for years, the Forest Service said back in 2018. Weird. Well, what about some of these other land management agencies that are throwing their hands up in the air about this beetle, what they call outbreak, as if it's a disease instead of a natural species? Well, the Jefferson County Open Space, which right now is conducting some of the most aggressive fuel reduction, in quotations, logging that I have ever seen across the West, not just in Colorado, but across the West, they said standing dead trees are no more likely to catch fire than standing green. That's an interesting admission there. Well, unfortunately, let's keep going here, because the proposal of the state of Colorado, which I'm going to get into a moment, which is a Department of Natural Resources extraction, and Governor Jared Polis has put forward a mountain pine beetle task force, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But what I want to show you is that, of course, they're going to be proposing more logging. But here are some more of these studies. I just want to get the scientific studies out of the way, so then when I go on to speak about this, you're not going to be doubting me, or at least I will have some backing. So, well, we have to cut the trees down, even though they don't contribute to wildfire, okay? So just to get rid of the beetles, because we don't like bugs, we think that they're bed bugs or ticks or lice or who knows, right? Well, let's see if that's even effective. A 2014 study published in a peer-reviewed journal, quote, found higher numbers of mature living trees remained in control stands of Ponderosa pine than in thin stands post-mountain pine beetle outbreak. Once the beetles have run their course, more residual living trees, 100, actually remain in the control plot than in the thin plot, 90. And in fact, humans have contributed more to tree mortality than have the beetles. So you go in there, you're trying to prevent the spread of these beetles by cutting trees down, and you have to account for the trees that are going to be killed by the beetles and the trees that were killed in logging. And then you have a plot where you just let the beetles do their thing. Less trees are killed there. And now a 2013 study co-authored by professor in the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Conservation Biology at Colorado State University, found that, quote, preemptive thinning may reduce susceptibility to small outbreaks. Okay, very interesting. So very small outbreaks, but it is unlikely to reduce susceptibility to large landscape scale epidemics. And so that's what the state of Colorado is saying right now. This is a large outbreak. So basically what they're saying here is if the stand was in the path of an ongoing mountain pine beetle epidemic, spacing and density of trees had little effect. In other words, it doesn't work. So maybe if you have a few of these beetles in your yard and you don't want 17 of your trees to die or whatever it is out of 100, maybe you can prevent the spread. But if this is across the area, which is happening, you can't do anything about it. So this USU study found that such thinning ignores the, quote, long-term ecological costs, and tree removal has, quote, the potential to inadvertently lead to heightened insect activity in which, quote, outbreaks could be prolonged. Okay, so there's the science. You can go to coloradosmokescreen.org if you want to read those studies. You can find all of those. You don't, again, have to take my word for any of this stuff, right? But why am I talking about beetles right now in terms of what you can do? Well, here's what's happening. In Colorado, this mountain pine beetle task force by the Colorado Department of Natural Resources Extraction and Governor Jared Polis. So they put out a press release, I believe it was late December, that made completely false, completely debunked by the consensus of science about a link between wildfire and beetles. So they just came out there saying, with their guns blazing, we're having beetles. This is going to increase wildfire. What? How? Why are you saying that? That's not true. And we're going to have to do some logging. And this is the really upsetting piece of this. So who are the appointees on this beetle task force? Well, they are a who's who of who's logging public lands in Colorado. And we've been trying to set up meetings to talk to these folks, and they actually ignored us until we got state legislators involved. So we've been trying to set up meetings with some of the scientists. They haven't even talked to those scientists. Y'all, this is so upsetting that I'm saying y'all. That's how bad I've turned into a Southerner. But let me tell you about some of the folks on this beetle task force, because if you actually read the press release, it does mention an increase in timber production. They very clearly state that. So let's see here. Well, let's give the government a chance. There's a thing that's happening and they want to respond to it. That's what governments do. Okay, that's okay. So let's look at this February 19 list of appointees from the Department of Natural Resources, and then 2 appointees were from the governor's office. So let's see. Okay, who do we have on this list? Maybe they're good. The Colorado Timber Industry Association, a representative from there. Oh, well, so the logging industry. Another representative from, the Colorado Mass Timber Coalition. Okay, so those are all, that's the timber industry. So the timber industry is deciding about whether or not to cut down forests, making this debunked link between wildfire and beetles. Well, okay, that's just 2 of the people. I'm sure there's other good people there. There's representatives from the U.S. Forest Service. So the ones who have this Big 4 logging schemes totaling almost 500,000 acres across the entire length of Colorado's Front Range Rocky Mountains in 7 counties, 61,000 acres across 17 roadless areas. So that's 61,000 acres of logging across 17 roadless areas as a part of that 500,000 acres of logging. It includes clear cutting, logging in endangered species habitat, mature and old growth forests. Oh, well, that's not great, but I guess the Forest Service should be a part of this. Well, the National Forest Foundation, well, that sounds good. Oh, wait, they're the de facto NGO arm of the U.S. Forest Service to promote logging. Yeah. All right, well, let's keep going down the list here. The Bureau of Land Management, which carries out taxpayer funding, logging, and livestock ranching, mining, and drilling across the western U.S. Okay, well, all right, we got some local governments here. So Jefferson County, wait, isn't that the county that's doing the most aggressive logging that we've ever seen in the name of fuel reduction? Yes, and it's represented by Commissioner Leslie Dahlkemper, who has completely ignored any of the public feedback and who has actually publicly, and I don't say this lightly because I have video of this, made false statements on the record claiming that they were not logging older trees. At the time, we had photos of them cutting down 129-year-old trees, which she denied. And then we found out they were actually logging 211-year-old trees up to that old. So they've been pushing some of the most aggressive logging there on this. Something called the Colorado Forest Health Council, which was formed by Department of Natural Resources in Colorado. They were formed to basically promote public lands logging in the name of wildfire. Okay, well, we do have a conservation group. Guys, it's going to be okay. Oh, it's the Nature Conservancy, whose $1.8 billion annual budget has shifted from funding land conservation to working lands extraction, which includes promoting and carrying out public lands logging in the name of fuel reduction, livestock ranching. Many people in the environmental community do not consider the Nature Conservancy a conservation group anymore. They're something different. So that's upsetting. There are a few other folks there that, to do with an energy company that actually has been cutting down forests as well. There's some fire departments. Of course, they should be there, but they also promote logging. There are some other county governments also doing logging. But now let's look into some of the non-voting members. So these are ones who are just in an advisory capacity. This is appointed by the Department of Natural Resources. Well, we have the Colorado State Forest Service, which is the main entity in the state of Colorado that's logging public lands and promoting the timber industry. We have the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. Am I boring you guys? Because this is a long list, but we're almost done. So the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute publicly promotes aggressive fuel reduction logging, yet behind the scenes, we actually, through a Colorado Open Records Act request, we found emails where this entity admits that a lot of science contests the efficacy of what they're doing for logging. They said that the government agencies can, quote, overpromise results of the logging, and yet they advise the governments to never admit this other science exists for fear of, and this is the quote for them, a win for the opponents, as in scientists, advocates, and local concerned citizens. So this is an entity that knows better and is still telling entities to deny science. Now, the governor has appointed some folks to state legislators. We don't really know what their take is on this as of yet. One of them happens to be my representative, so we're hoping for some engagement. This person was the one who followed up on our concerns that the DNR wasn't even responding to us for requests to set up meetings with scientists and members of the ecosystem advocate community. So we're hoping for the best there, but these are some other appointees. Senator John Hickenlooper, who is sponsoring the Orwellian Fix Our Forests, quote, act to dismantle bedrock environmental laws to rush through logging in the name of wildfire. He's basically putting forth the most alarming public lands logging bill that we've seen probably since George W. Bush's, quote, Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003. Senator Michael Bennet, who's introduced bills asking for up to $60 billion in taxpayers. Yep, $60 billion in taxpayer dollars to log public lands. And he's pushing Trump's Forest Service to do more logging than they currently are. He's saying that Trump's not having the Forest Service do enough logging. He's on the thing. Representative Joe Neguse, who's not just promoted, but he's actually funded directly through his own, I forget the process, but it's something where he can request specific grants for government. It funded clear cutting and old growth tree logging in Jefferson County. I have directly linked the documents with the logging projects. It's a fact. Representative Brittany Pedersen, whose district is home to the largest logging project in Colorado history, and she's long promoted fuel reduction logging. She's refused to tour the area. She's not been responsive to concerns. And, well, okay, that's not great, right? But there's somebody who's overseeing the task force. So this person's going to have a lot of say, and this is the person that we have been told that we could meet with whenever that might happen. So this person is an assistant director for Department of Natural Resources, Forest Health and Wildfire Mitigation, which oversees what's called it doesn't matter what it's called, but it is the main fund for fuel reduction logging in Colorado. It's been disbursing tens of millions of dollars. That's the person who's overseeing this, the person whose job is to give money out for logging. Does this worry you? Because it worries me. So that's basically what's been going on in terms of the politics, and this is where we need your help. So we need to call on our governor, who is a part of this, to appoint, at the very least, independent scientists and actual members of real conservation community to this task force. At the very least. In all honesty, the task force should be disbanded, and the efforts should be toward protecting these forests. And beetles are just a part of the forest. And if people are concerned about their homes burning, even though there's no link to beetles, we put more money into home hardening, defensible space pruning, up to 100 feet around homes. The thing's scientifically, consensus-wise proven to work to protect communities. But if that doesn't happen, at the very least, there are a few spots left, for they said there can be 20 people who are official appointees. I believe there were 17 there. So calling on Governor Polis to appoint independent scientists. We have a couple in mind, and conservationists. We have somebody in mind as well. But if that doesn't happen, here's why this is so alarming. There is a lot of debate, whether it's legitimate or not, about some of the fuel reduction logging stuff. My opinion, it's all bunk. It's the fires in the forest have nothing to do with communities. You protect the communities, and the cutting doesn't slow down any fire. In fact, it can increase it. The only fires it may do anything about are the lower intensity fires that are already easily contained and not spreading to communities. So it's not legitimate in my opinion, but let's just pretend that you can have a debate about that. Fine. What you can't really have a debate about is this beetle stuff. Now, the only argument is that there's this between 1 to 3 years when the trees start, it's called the red phase. They start dying, the needles start dying, and before they've dropped on the ground, there may be an increased risk of those trees catching fire. So that's a 1 to 3 year period. Now, of course, each tree dies. It's a wave. So a tree dies here, a tree dies here. So it's not forest wide. So when a tree dies there may be a likelihood of that one tree burning. So that's something to add into the discussion. But again, the science shows that overall, it is not an increase of likelihood of catching fire in the forests. One tree here, that tree, that's not the same thing as the likelihood of the forest igniting. And it has no increase in the severity of burning. In fact, can reduce that. So we don't really have much of a debate on this, but I think they've gotten away in Colorado and across the West in the US with just ignoring any facts on this, and media will just completely either ignore the issue or just report on this as if it is fact. And that's what happened here thus far in Colorado. The media has just basically run their press release, and we've reached out to all these media outlets. Only one of them did a good article, and they did a very good article where they talked to scientists, they talked to various members of the conservation community, and they talked to the ones promoting the logging. Yay, actual journalism. It's not that hard. But this is the problem here. So this is something where there isn't really a debate, and it's still being moved forward. And yes, it's Trumpian in the fact that you just say a thing and you just keep moving forward with it, and the facts don't matter, and anyone who disagrees with you is a liar, right? So they're doing that in blue state, Colorado. So for those who think I'm beating up on Trump, which I am when it's valid to beat up on him, the Democrats are doing it here. They're taking the page from his playbook. And so we don't have environmental protection in Colorado. We don't have any science that's really being incorporated into this. And guess what? We don't even have a participatory democracy here in Colorado anymore. It's like you can say things, but it doesn't go anywhere. There's no mechanism for information getting through the government to do something worthwhile for environmental protection. It will do the opposite of that almost every time. So I'm taking the Colorado flag right now, I'm turning it upside down, and I'm waving it. We need your help. So a lot of the large conservation groups in Colorado, not all of them, and I will give a shout out to one that is doing its job on this, Environment America, Environment Colorado. Some people may disagree with some of what they're doing, but in this case, they put out a post on the science of beetles showing that there is no link between that and wildfire. So they're doing a good job. A lot of the other groups are completely absent on this, and we suspect actually are promoting a lot of this stuff for political reasons or funding reasons, whatever. But that's why it's just up to several of us in the grassroots, and we have a lot of folks who are working on this, but we don't have the name recognition and the influence. And we're finding that even the peer-reviewed scientists, the leading experts in the world on this, are being completely not just ignored, but kept out of the process. We're hoping that changes soon. I mean, the federal government should be sending the National Guard in here to Colorado to protect our forests from our rogue government. This is like, not to make the comparison, because obviously there are a lot of differences, but in some ways it's like, this is like a pre-civil rights South. We're like in a situation where our governments are just not upholding basic rule of law, and we need the feds to come in to establish some order. Now, obviously I'm joking, but it's almost to that point where there is no recourse to democracy here in Colorado. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter if the facts are behind you. They just come up with an agenda in advance, even if it's the opposite of true. Our media will not do anything to report on it. We know for a fact that opinion pieces are even now being rejected by these media outlets, the worst of which is called Colorado Sun. Please do not share articles from Colorado Sun. They are a corporate-funded anti-environmental propaganda outlet. You might like some of the stuff that they're putting out, but that's their way of getting you on their side. Please do not share their articles. And these places are just refusing to run any pieces. The Denver Post, which has been okay on this, they refused to run a piece from a former researcher on environmental issues. They wouldn't even consider any perspective that isn't promoting logging, even when it comes to this beetle stuff, which is a slam dunk. So here's what I would like you to do. All right, we don't need to send in the National Guard, but will you, after listening to this, please contact Colorado Governor Jared Polis at the following number and email: 303-866-2471. That's 303-866-2471, or email Governor Polis at state.co.us. That's Governor Polis at state.co.us. I'll put this info in the description. And demand that at the very least he adds scientists and wildlife advocates, real conservationists to the mountain pine beetle task force. Though feel free to ask that he scrap the whole thing, because it's complete nonsense and completely illegitimate, and it is being run entirely, almost entirely, by those who have done nothing but promote and carry out public lands logging, whose livelihoods, whose agencies, whose industry organizations are funded by taxpayer dollars to log your public forests. So this is what's going on. Beetlemania. No Lucy in the sky with diamonds here. This is some bad stuff. I need your help. We need your help. The forest needs your help. Please do what you can. Really appreciate it, and take care.